This video focuses on MAXQDA Codes. If you've already watched the introduction to this set of videos, you'll know that our purpose here is not to teach you how to operate MAXQDA, but to illustrate that codes can be harnessed in very different ways and that their use is driven by strategies. If you haven't yet watched the introduction video, we recommend you do that before watching the rest of this video. This video illustrates two contrasting ways of harnessing MAXQDA codes. There are many ways that codes at the tactics level can be harnessed for different purposes at the strategies level. To illustrate two very different ways of harnessing codes, we will use two research projects. Firstly, Daniel Rash's Into Euro project, and secondly, Christian Smider's Civil Rights project. The context of Daniel's project is written up in his mini-case overview, and Christian's project is described in detail in Chapter 9. If you haven't yet familiarised yourself with these documents, now would be the time to pause this video to do so. Codes at the tactics level within MAXQDA are commonly intuitively used to represent concepts at the strategies level, and they are then linked to segments of data where those concepts are identified. This way of harnessing codes is common because identifying concepts within data is the basis of many approaches to qualitative analysis. So in our first example, we show how this looks in the context of a specific analytic task in Daniel's project. The task is to interrogate whether certain types of frame are successful or unsuccessful in each directive. You'll know from reading Daniel's mini-case overview that directives are legal acts of the European Union and that frames are types of communication that Daniel was interested in identifying within directives. At the strategies level, therefore, frames and success are concepts and directives are units of data. So now let's go and have a look at how Daniel represented these concepts and units in his MAXQDA project. I'm first quickly going to show you where the concepts of frames and success are represented. We can see that Daniel has used codes to represent the concepts of frames and success. In fact, there are 20 different frames that he used to code evidence for these communication styles within the directive documents. Let's just have a look at the legal frame, which is the one that we're going to focus on. If I open this up, you can see that there are two dimensions of that frame where the coding has happened, and I can access that coding very easily within the coded segments window. So the concept of frames at the strategies level is represented as a code at the tactics level. And the same, of course, is true of success. There are 5 different dimensions of success that Daniel has used to code the data, and if we open up one of those, then again we can retrieve those coded segments. Let's then quickly have a look and see where the directives are represented. Remember, directives are a unit of data for Daniel, and there are 3 EU directives that he's focusing on, and they are represented by these numbers associated with the document groups. Daniel's also split the documents relating to each directive according to whether they're authored by EU institutions or by other stakeholders, but we're using document groups to represent the unit of the directive. Okay, so now let's think a little bit more about why it was useful for Daniel to represent his concepts as codes. The reason is because Daniel wants to interrogate his data to see whether certain types of frame are successful or unsuccessful in relation to each directive. And he can do that because he has got co-occurring codes. So we can see here, when retrieving coded segments based at one of the dimensions of the frame, that we've also got co-occurrences here with some of the success codes. So what that now means is that we can interrogate the data to ask for the connections between the dimensions of an individual frame with the different success codes. And we can focus that on a particular directive. And I've done that here by running a code relations browser. If you've never done this before, you'll be able to master the software operations on your own. But remember, our purpose in this video is to teach you why the component was harnessed in the way it was. And that was because in Daniel's analytic task, he wanted to interrogate the connections, the co-occurrences, or, as MAXQDA calls them, the intersections between different success codes represented in the browser as columns with different dimensions of an individual frame. We can see here the number of coded segments for each intersection, and when we double click on those, if we have our Retrieve Segments window open, then what MAXQDA will do is in the background show us all of the segments of data where the two codes that I asked for co-occur. And in that way, Daniel is able to harness codes in order to answer his task. It's important, of course, to remember that this is not the only way that we can harness codes. There are many other ways in which codes can be harnessed. So now we're going to show you Christian's project and how he harnessed codes in a very different way. Christian's task was to create subsets of access records representing each region. You'll know from reading Chapter 9 that in Christian's project, access records are sets of open-ended questions about how programs expand access to non-traditional and underserved audiences, and that regions are areas within the state of Wisconsin where programs are delivered. At the strategies level, therefore, access records are units of data and regions are units of meaning. So now let's go and have a look at how Christian represented these units in his MAXQDA project, and also how and why he harnessed codes at the tactics level to accomplish this task. As we discussed when looking at Daniel's project, a commonly intuitive way of thinking about harnessing codes at the tactics level is to use them to represent concepts at the strategies level. However, the units for Christian's current task, access records and regions, may not intuitively feel like they would be best represented using codes. And that's because access records are represented by whole documents in Christian's project, and regions are characteristics that relate to those whole documents. We can see that by looking at one of Christian's documents. We can see that it contains all the sets of open-ended questions. Thus, each document at the tactics level represents a unit of data, the access record, at the strategies level. We can also see, by looking at this access record document, that information about regions is contained within the document. Here at the top, this is the name of one of the counties within one of the larger 4 regions in Wisconsin. The information is stored like this because of the way that Christian collected and imported the data, which you can read about in Chapter 9 and see in the video about that stage of the project. So how did Christian harness MAXQDA codes for his task? What he did was to harness codes at the tactics level to temporarily represent the unit of the region at the strategies level. And he did that so that he could act upon those codes to group his access record documents into regions. In other words, he didn't use codes for this task in the intuitively common way to represent concepts, but he harnessed them as part of a constructed tool to accomplish his task. Let's have a quick look. If we go and have a look under the organisational group of codes, we can see codes for each region. These are the 4 higher level regions within which the county information is relevant. So Dane County, for example, relates to one of the regions. These codes were generated by auto-coding the documents according to the county names. I'm not going to show you how to do that here, as that's not the focus of this video, and you can find out how to auto-code when you're practicing on your own or by attending a workshop. The point now is that linked to these region codes is only each instance of the county name. I'll show you that by opening them up. Here are all the coded segments for the East Metro region, and if I choose each individual coded segment, you'll see that different counties have been coded at the region code. However, that's not sufficient in itself to represent Christian's unit of meaning, as it only applies to a tiny amount of each document. And he needs to group the whole documents in order that he can make comparisons by region. What Christian ended up with are document sets containing all of the relevant documents for each region, and here they are: the East Metro region, the South West region, etc. And within each of those are shortcuts to the documents that relate to each of those regions according to the county information. He didn't manually put the documents into each of these sets, but he harnessed the region codes in order to do so. He was able to do this because he knew that one of the actions that can be taken on codes at the tactics level within MAXQDA is to transform them into document variables. We can see this option here by right-clicking on one of the region codes. Once Christian had done that, he was then able to act on the variable values of each region, created by acting on the codes in this way, to create the document sets shown here. Again, I'm not showing you how to operate the software to make this happen in this video, as that's not our current focus. The point is that for the purposes of this particular analytic task, Christian was harnessing codes at the tactics level in a very different way from the commonly intuitive way of representing concepts at the strategies level. Christian also used codes to represent concepts in a similar way to how Daniel did, although of course his concepts were very different. But having an awareness of the actions that can be taken on components and oscillating between thinking at the strategies level and thinking at the tactics level enabled Christian to think several steps ahead and to plan for how to harness components in a creative way in order to accomplish this task. The examples that we have given in this video are just that, examples. It is certainly not the case that the commonly intuitive way of harnessing codes is less powerful than the alternative way that we have illustrated. It's just different. And different ways of harnessing codes at the tactics level are appropriate depending on the needs of the strategies. We have just picked 2 examples in this video. There are, of course, many other analytic tasks that involve the use of codes and many other ways that codes can be harnessed. Indeed, both Daniel and Christian use codes for several other purposes than we have illustrated in this video. Remember that from a technical point of view, a code is simply an object within the software that can be acted upon in various ways. This means that it's up to you to bestow meaning on codes, according to how you label, define, and use them. To develop your understanding of how codes can be harnessed for a variety of purposes, please study the actions that can be taken on codes in Chapter 6, the illustrations in that chapter, and Chapters 8 and 9, as well as the other videos that discuss codes.